The morning of the flight began like any other for Maya Johnson. She pressed her navy blue uniform, smoothed the wrinkles with practiced hands, and tied her silk scarf neatly at her collar. A decade of experience had taught her to wear her calm like armor. She had seen it all: delayed passengers fuming, nervous flyers clutching armrests, even the occasional in-flight medical emergency. But today felt different. She couldn't explain why. At the crew briefing, the captain ran through the safety protocols and expected weather conditions. Maya sat quietly, nodding where appropriate, her thoughts wandering. She loved her job, but it wasn't easy, being a black woman in an industry where appearances mattered and where prejudice sometimes lingered in subtle glances or careless words. She had learned resilience. She had learned to rise above, to meet disdain with dignity. By the time the luxury jet was ready for boarding, Maya was stationed at the entrance, her warm smile greeting the passengers. Most were regulars in this world of wealth, business elites, investors, and celebrities who treated the skies as their personal lounges. Maya welcomed them with the same professional courtesy she gave everyone, regardless of how they treated her in return. And then, he arrived, Howard Kensington, the billionaire real estate mogul, known for his cutthroat deals, ruthless boardroom tactics, and, unfortunately, a history of racially insensitive remarks that had often surfaced in headlines. Howard was tall, with graying hair slicked neatly back, and he carried himself with a kind of confidence that made people either shrink or bristle. His Italian suit looked freshly tailored, his cufflinks gleamed in the overhead light, and his cologne arrived a second before he did. Maya straightened. She had heard stories about him from colleagues, none flattering. Still, she put on her best smile. "Good afternoon, Mr. Kensington. Welcome aboard." Howard barely glanced at her, his eyes already scanning for his seat. "MMHM," he muttered, dismissing her presence like background noise. Maya's smile didn't falter. It couldn't. She had learned long ago that professionalism meant showing grace even when it wasn't returned. Howard made his way down the aisle, his carry-on slung casually over his shoulder, and then it happened. He brushed, no, collided, with a tall man who was reaching up to stow his bag in the overhead compartment. The impact jolted the man forward, nearly knocking the bag from his hands. The man turned quickly, eyes narrowing. "Hey," but Howard didn't stop. Did it look? Did it even acknowledge him? He simply adjusted his jacket, lifted his chin, and kept walking to his seat. The man froze for a moment, stunned. Then his lips tightened. He wasn't alone. Two of his friends, seated nearby, had witnessed the slight. They exchanged looks, sharp and heavy with unspoken meaning. Maya noticed. She always noticed. Her years in the cabin had trained her to sense when tension was more than momentary. She watched the man's jaw tighten, the flicker of recognition in his eyes as he realized exactly who Howard Kensington was, and she saw the way his friends leaned closer, whispering in low tones, their faces clouded with resentment. For most passengers, an accidental bump would be brushed off, but with Howard, nothing was simple. His reputation preceded him, and in that moment, what might have been forgiven as clumsiness became something more, an insult layered atop a history of arrogance. Maya inhaled quietly, tucking away the unease. She reminded herself, stay professional, keep watch, that's all you can do. As the rest of the passengers settled in, Maya moved gracefully through the cabin, offering assistance where needed. When she reached Howard's seat, he was already tapping impatiently on the armrest. "Scotch," he said flatly. She blinked. "Of course, Mr. Kensington. Would you like?" "Neat. And don't take too long." The words weren't shouted, but the dismissive tone stung all the same. Maya bit the inside of her cheek, nodded, and went to fulfill his order. She returned swiftly, setting the glass carefully on his tray. Howard raised an eyebrow. "Took you long enough." Maya forced a polite smile. "My apologies, sir." She walked away, her heart heavy. She had endured comments like that before, but what made this harder was the knowledge that she had done nothing wrong, except exist in a world where some people refused to see her dignity. Hours passed. The jet climbed steadily through the clouds, the earth a quilt of green and blue far below. Meals were served, conversations murmured, and the cabin settled into the rhythm of long-haul travel. But the tension never fully disappeared. Maya noticed it in the way the three men, let's call them Marcus, Darnell, and Troy, kept glancing at Howard. Their voices, when they spoke to one another, were low and clipped. Anger simmered, though no one else seemed to notice. Howard, for his part, reclined comfortably, sipping his drink and occasionally barking a demand. "Another round. This is overcooked. You people really need to learn efficiency." Each comment pressed heavier on Maya's patience. but she kept her composure, reminding herself of something her grandmother used to say: kindness is not weakness, it is strength controlled. Still, the air felt different, charged, as though at any moment, something might ignite. And Maya wasn't wrong, because halfway across the Atlantic, as the sun dipped toward the horizon and painted the clouds in orange and gold, Marcus suddenly stood. His chair scraped loudly against the floor. Howard barely looked up, but when Marcus stepped directly into the aisle, blocking his view, Howard's expression soured. "What's this?" Howard demanded. Marcus's voice was low at first, but steady. "You think you can just walk around, bump into people, disrespect them, and not even say sorry?" Howard blinked, incredulous. "Excuse me." Darnell and Troy rose as well, flanking Marcus. Passengers stirred, whispers rippling through the cabin. Phones appeared, cameras clicking on. "You heard me," Marcus said, his tone rising. "You think money makes you untouchable? That you don't owe anyone basic respect?" Howard scoffed, shifting in his seat. "I don't owe you anything." And that was the spark. In an instant, words gave way to shoves, and the cabin erupted in chaos. The moment Marcus's voice rose, the cabin's delicate peace shattered like glass. "Say it," he demanded, leaning over Howard's seat. "Say you're sorry." Howard's face tightened, his jaw jutting stubbornly. He was a man who had built an empire on pride, on never bending, never yielding. To apologize, even for something small, felt beneath him, especially to these men. "I don't answer to you," he spat, his words dripping with disdain. Troy slammed his palm against the headrest, making the passengers around them jump. "You think your money makes you better than us?" Howard straightened in his seat, his voice sharp and cold. "I know it does." That was the breaking point. In an instant, Marcus shoved him back, the billionaire's glass tipping and spilling amber liquid down his shirt. Gasps filled the air. Some passengers scrambled away, others lifted their phones higher, recording every second. A woman clutched her child, pulling her close as though danger lurked in every corner. "Gentlemen, please." Maya's voice cut through the commotion, calm but urgent. She pushed her way into the aisle, her small frame somehow commanding the attention of men twice her size. She raised her hands, palms open in a gesture of peace. "Stop this now." But the men were too wound up, their anger too raw. "He disrespected me," Marcus snapped, his chest heaving. "All he had to do was apologize, and he won't," Darnell added, glaring at Howard like a predator sizing up prey. Howard wiped his shirt with a napkin, his arrogance unshaken. "I don't apologize to nobodies." The words hung heavy in the air, poisonous. For a split second, Maya wanted to let them deal with him, to step back and let the consequences of his pride unfold. But deep in her chest, something wouldn't allow it. A voice, her grandmother's voice, echoed inside her. "Kindness is not about who deserves it, it's about who needs it most." So she stepped forward, placing herself squarely between Howard and the men. "That's enough," she said firmly, her eyes locked with Marcus's, unwavering. "This isn't the way. You're angry, and you have every right to be, but violence won't give you the respect you're looking for. It will only take away your dignity." Marcus's nostrils flared, his fists were clenched, trembling with restraint. "You don't get it." I do get it," Maya interrupted gently, her voice softening. "I've worked flights for 10 years. I've dealt with men like him more times than I can count, and every time, I've had to bite my tongue, swallow my pride, and remind myself that my humanity isn't defined by their words, it's defined by my choices." The cabin was silent now, all eyes on her. Even Howard, though his expression remained defiant, seemed to be listening. "You want respect," Maya continued. "Show the world you're stronger than him. Don't let his arrogance turn you into what you hate." For a moment, Marcus's shoulders dropped, uncertainty flickering across his face. But then Howard ruined it. "Pathetic," he sneered. "You're defending me? After the way I spoke to you earlier? Some people really don't know their place." The insult sliced the air like a knife. Gasps rippled through the cabin again. Maya's throat tightened. She could feel the burn of humiliation rising in her chest, but she held her ground, even as her eyes stunk. Marcus stepped forward again, his voice cracking with fury. "That's it. He's not walking off this plane untouched." The men surged closer, and passengers screamed. Maya instinctively spread her arms, shielding Howard with her own body. "If you want him," she said, her voice steady despite the fear thrumming in her veins, "you'll have to go through me." The men froze, startled. "Why?" Darnell demanded. "Why protect him? He doesn't care about you." "You're right," Maya said softly. "He doesn't, but I care about me, and I refuse to let his ugliness change who I am. Violence won't make this right. Compassion will." Her words hung in the charged silence. Slowly, ever so slowly, the men's fury began to waver. Marcus lowered his fist, breathing heavily. Troy shifted his weight, uncertainty clouding his face. Even Darnell looked torn. It was Maya's moment of truth, and she didn't waste it. "Think of the headlines," she said quietly, her eyes moving between them. "Do you want to be remembered as men who stood up for respect, or men who lost everything because they couldn't walk away?" The fight drained out of them, piece by piece. Their fists unclenched, their shoulders slumped. The cabin exhaled, but Howard, still refusing to yield, scoffed again. "Cowards." Marcus's head snapped back toward him, rage rekindled, but Maya lifted her hand, stopping him. "No," she whispered, "don't let him win by dragging you down." And then, for the first time in the entire flight, Marcus looked at her, not as an obstacle, but as a human being trying to bridge an impossible divide. His chest rose and fell, and finally, with a sharp exhale, he stepped back. The other two followed. Passengers burst into applause, soft at first, then louder, filling the cabin with relief. Phones lowered, children peeked from behind their mother's arms, and Maya, trembling but resolute, guided the three men back to their seats. Crisis averted, for now. But the story didn't end there, because even after the confrontation, the cabin remained tense. Howard refused to look at Maya, his pride bruised deeper than his shirt. He muttered insults under his breath, each one a dagger meant for her ears alone. Yet Maya kept working, her smile steady, her composure intact. She offered drinks to nervous passengers, reassured a crying child, and carried herself with grace, though inside she was exhausted. And slowly, something unexpected happened. The men, Marcus, Darnell, and Troy, began to watch her, not with anger, but with a growing respect. They had seen her courage, they had felt her words temper their rage, and they realized that the strongest person on that plane wasn't the billionaire in the suit, it was the woman in the flight attendant's uniform. At one point, Marcus caught her eye, his lips pressed together, and though he didn't speak, the look said what words couldn't. "Thank you." For Maya, that was enough. The flight continued, hours stretching on. The sun set beyond the clouds, painting the sky in deep purples and blues. The cabin grew quieter, the adrenaline fading, but the memory of what had happened lingered. Howard remained bitter. He sipped his scotch with short, sharp movements, his pride refusing to soften. Yet there was a flicker in his eyes, a shadow of doubt, a question he refused to admit. Why had she protected him? And that was the power of kindness. It planted seeds where hostility could not. Halfway through the night, as passengers dozed and the cabin lights dimmed, Maya sat in the crew jump seat, finally allowing herself to breathe. Her hands trembled slightly. She replayed the scene over and over. Why had she put herself at risk? Why defend a man who would never defend her? And then she remembered her grandmother's words again. Kindness is not about them, it's about you. Maya realized she had chosen compassion not because Howard deserved it, but because she deserved not to lose herself to anger. And that choice, that one act of kindness, was already changing the way others saw her. By the time breakfast service began hours later, the mood in the cabin had shifted. Passengers smiled at Maya, whispered words of gratitude as she passed. A woman touched her hand softly, murmuring, "You were so brave." Even a man who had filmed the entire ordeal lowered his phone and said, "You reminded me what real strength looks like." But Howard remained silent. His pride was a fortress he wasn't ready to abandon. Still, the seed was there, and seeds have a way of growing in the most unlikely soil. And so, as the flight neared its destination, one truth remained. Kindness doesn't always win applause. It doesn't always change the hearts of those who hurt us, but it always changes us. And sometimes, that's enough to change the world around us. Do you believe one small act of kindness can really change a person's life? Tell me what you think in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective. The first rays of dawn spilled across the horizon, streaking the clouds with gold. The jet's cabin stirred awake as passengers shifted in their seats, stretching, murmuring, fastening belts for the descent. Maya moved down the aisle one last time, her practiced smile in place, her voice steady though fatigue pressed against her bones. She had carried the weight of the night, the chaos, the confrontation, the insults, and yet, she had not bent under it. Howard Kensington, still seated rigidly by the window, had barely spoken since the incident. His once crisp shirt was stained, his pride bruised, but his eyes followed Maya more often than before. There was something in them he couldn't name, a disquiet that wealth couldn't silence. When the captain announced their descent, relief washed through the cabin. The ordeal was nearly over, but for Howard, something lingered. The billionaire who had always believed himself untouchable now carried a memory he couldn't shake, a woman he had belittled, standing between him and three furious men, risking herself for his safety. Why? The question gnawed at him. In boardrooms, kindness was weakness. In his empire, power was the only currency that mattered. Yet here, 30,000 feet above the earth, kindness had been the only thing that saved him. The wheels touched the runway with a shudder, the engines roaring as the plane slowed. Applause broke out, a tradition among nervous travelers, but this time it carried another layer, relief that they had all arrived safely after what had nearly spiraled into disaster. As the aircraft taxied to the gate, passengers began to gather their belongings. Marcus, Darnell, and Troy remained subdued, their earlier fury now a shadow of itself. Each of them cast furtive glances toward Maya, respect etched into their expressions. They had come onto the plane with anger burning hot, but they left it humbled by her courage. Maya, as always, was the last to leave her post. She stood near the door, thanking each passenger as they disembarked. Her voice was warm, her composure unbroken. When Marcus passed, he paused just long enough to meet her eyes. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice low, but sincere. She gave a small nod, her smile gentle. "Safe travels." Troy and Darnell followed, each offering a wordless nod of respect. And then came Howard. He stood in the aisle, his carry-on in hand, his chin still lifted as though clinging to the last fragments of pride. Passengers behind him waited, but he didn't move. Instead, he looked at Maya. Their eyes met. For the first time since the flight began, there was no arrogance in his gaze, only a weight he couldn't disguise. Maya waited. She wouldn't prompt him. She wouldn't lower herself by asking for what he should have given freely. Howard opened his mouth. The words hovered, but pride held them hostage. His throat tightened. He shifted his bag, hesitated once more, and then, barely audible, he said, "Thank you." Not much, but more than she had expected. Maya's expression softened. "You're welcome, Mr. Kensington." He lingered a moment longer, then stepped off the plane. The story could have ended there, with Maya moving on to her next flight and Howard returning to his empire unchanged. But kindness has a way of echoing long after the moment passes. Weeks later, headlines spread across business journals. Howard Kensington announces major philanthropic initiative. At first, people scoffed. They assumed it was a publicity stunt, a tax write-off, another scheme. But in quieter interviews, those closest to him whispered of a change, not sudden, not dramatic, but undeniable. Howard had begun asking questions he had never asked before, about dignity, about humanity, about what it meant to use power not as a weapon, but as a gift. And though Maya never knew it, her act of compassion had planted the seed. For her, life returned to its rhythm. Flights came and went. Passengers tested her patience, others brightened her day. But she carried that memory with her, the night she stood between arrogance and anger, and chose kindness over bitterness. Her grandmother's words proved true. Kindness wasn't about who deserved it, it was about who needed it. And sometimes, even the most unworthy carried a need they could never admit. Months later, Maya received a letter delivered through the airline. The envelope was plain, but inside was a note written in neat, deliberate handwriting. "Ms. Johnson, you don't know me, though I know you well enough. On a flight some months ago, you chose to shield me when you had no reason to. I've thought about that moment every day since. For the first time, I saw what real strength looks like, not in money or power, but in compassion. You saved more than my life that day. You saved my perspective. Thank you, Howard Kensington." Along with the note was a donation receipt, a sizable contribution made in her name to a scholarship fund for aspiring flight attendants from underrepresented backgrounds. Maya pressed the letter to her chest, tears welling in her eyes. She had never sought recognition, never expected gratitude, but to know her act had not been in vain, it was more than she ever imagined. The story of that flight became one Maya carried for the rest of her life, not because of Howard, or the men, or the headlines, but because it proved something she had always believed deep down. Kindness is the most radical form of power. It disarms anger, it humbles pride, and sometimes, it even changes hearts that seemed unchangeable. And now, dear listener, I want to leave you with this thought. If you had the chance to show kindness today, even to someone who didn't deserve it, what would you do? Share your answer in the comments. I'd love to read them, and don't forget to subscribe, like, and share to family and friends. Thanks for watching.